Good evening. Welcome to the QCIS channel. Where on this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and what I'm going to talk about this evening is water treatment process. Now, very important to understand what goes into our water. How do we treat it? Because there are a lot of rivers out there. There's the ocean out there. And when it comes to water, water can be dirty. This is why we have environmental standards. But still, we have a lot of factories that use water. And what they do, they will dump their waste in the water. Now, when we go to the bathroom, we have waste. So, how does that waste get cleaned? How does it get treated? Well, we have wastewater treatment plants. I want to go ahead and share my screen and talk about the process of water treatment. Now, water treatment. The purpose is to manage water discharge from homes, businesses, and industries to reduce the threat of water pollution. When we deal with water treatment, there's pre-treatment, preliminary treatment, primary treatment, secondary treatment, and then we talk about the biosolids, which has waste or sludge disposal. Now, when we talk about pre-treatment, it occurs in business or industry prior to discharge. And then we have this prevention because when we deal with water treatment, we also have a lot of toxic materials. So under pre-treatment, we also have prevention of toxic chemicals or excess nutrients being discharged into wastewater. We also have water discharge from homes, businesses, and industry, and that enters sanitary sewers. Also, water from rainwater on streets enters stormwater sewers, but there's a difference between a sanitary sewer and a stormwater. Now, combined sewers carry both sanitary waste and stormwater. Water moves toward the wastewater plant primarily by gravity flow. And then you have what you call lift stations. And what they do is they pump water from low-lying areas over hills to a plant. Now, here's the diagram, how it works. Now, if you're taking the fundamentals of engineering exam, this is what you'll have to know too, because you have two types of treatments. You have primary treatment and you have secondary treatment. Now, I'm going to go and explain both treatments. Now, basically, when we deal with water, it's incoming water from sewage, and the sewage is raw sewage. So what happens is that sewage goes into your screens. And then all of the big waste gets filtered out. Just think of if you were doing soil, you're doing gradation. What are you doing when you do gradation? You have sieves. So basically, when you shake all the big material, the material doesn't pass, well, you're still going to have small material. Well, when we have the primary treatment, you're going to have the same thing. You're going to have grit. And then what happens, your grit is going to go into your sedimentation tank. From the sedimentation tank, it's going to go into a digester. And from the digester, it goes into the sludge drying beds. And then it's going to be trucked to a landfill and used to improve agriculture land for mine reclamation. Now, also, you have a secondary tank, or you have secondary treatment. So if you see the flow can go two ways. Now, I just showed you how the flow goes from the sedimentation tank to the digester to the sludge dyeing beds and out through a truck. That's all in the primary treatment. Now, your secondary treatment is you have your sludge. Your sludge goes into what we call an aeration tank. Then you have a final sedimentation tank. And then this is where your water gets treated. And this is the water that comes to become surface water, comes from your lakes, your rivers, and your oceans. Well, this is the discharge. It's disinfecting. And what we use to disinfect water, we use chlorine. So again, what you're looking at here on this PowerPoint, you're actually looking at how a wastewater treatment plant works. Now, again, I'm giving it to you from the practical side because yes, I already knew. Now you have to know what the different pieces of equipment are during the process, and you have to understand that there are two processes: primary and secondary treatment. Now, again, the first one goes through a digester after it comes from the sludge drying beds, and then the other is discharge, and it's treated water to surface water, and that surface water goes into lakes, rivers, and oceans. Then we have your preliminary treatment. And remember what I told you, just like a sieve analysis, removing the big objects. Well, when water treatment does the same thing. In fact, when we go back, I just showed you, it goes right through the screens. And the screens basically filter out the big objects. Again, preliminary treatment removes large objects and non-degradable materials, protects pumps and equipment from damage, and there's a bar screen and a grit chamber. Again, this would be your bar screen, and this is your grit chamber right here. Here's your bar screen. Catches large objects that have gotten into the source system, and there are a lot of objects that go into your source systems, like bottles, bricks, pieces of wood. And this screen, what that screen does, it catches all that before it gets to the grit chamber. Now, the grit chamber, remember, you can filter out big materials, but there's still going to be some material to get through the screens. And the grit chamber removes the rots, gravel, and broken glass, and etc. And then you have your mesh screen. And in your mesh screen, now if you worked at a wastewater treatment plant, and I've actually seen all this, you're going to see a lot of other objects. You're going to see towels. This is all at a wastewater treatment plant. And I remember going to one in Virginia, and I've seen diapers, I've seen combs, I've seen plastic bags and syringes in that mesh screen. And basically, you're just trying to filter out all the materials so they don't get discharged into your water systems. Again, here's your preliminary treatment. Your preliminary treatment removes debris and grit. Here's your raw sewage. Here's your bar screen. Here's your debris removal. And then in the grit chamber, the velocity slows down, and then your coarse grit settles, And then you have your grit removal. Now your grit goes to your landfill. Now, when we deal with water treatment, we have a measurement and sampling at the inlet structure. Use a flow meter, and that continuously records the volume of water entering the treatment plant. And water samples are taken for the determination of suspended solids and BOD, which BOD is biological. And I'll give you what BOD stands for in just a minute. Also doing water treatment, we have suspended solids. It's the quality or the quantity of solid materials floating in the water column. Again, so get this correct here. Suspended solids, that is the quantity of solid materials floating in the water column. Now to get to BOD. BOD is biochemical oxygen demand. It's biochemical oxygen demand, and that's a measure of the amount of oxygen required to aerobically decompose organic matter in water. So you're using an aerator. So this is aerobically. So it's breaking down organic material in water. And that's what BOD is. It's biochemical oxygen demand. Generally, when something breaks down, we call it a half-life. Measurements of suspended solids and BOD indicate the effectiveness of the treatment process. So both suspended solids and BOD decrease as water moves through the water treatment processes. We have our primary treatment. It's a physical process. It's where wastewater flow is slowed down and suspended solids settle to the bottom by gravity. The material that settles is called sludge or biosolids. Now, when I was telling you about the tank is called a clarifying tank. Now, the primary treatment is to remove particulate organic material. So this is your clarifier tank. And then you have your rotating plow at the bottom. And then what happens is water enters at the center and flows over a weir at edge. And this is your weir right here. And it constitutes raw sludge. Now, what happens is your raw sludge is removed through sludge treatment. And then this is where you're compositing your anaerobic digestion, your fertilizer, and your methane. And then you have fat and oil float to the top and they're skimmed off. And if you look at it, very simple. Your rotating plow rotates. Now this is your weir right here. And you're using this clarifier tank, and here's the water as it enters the clarifying tank. And then here's your clarified water. And if you look at the chart, you follow the chart. Again, very good if you want to go into environmental engineering. Then you have your primary treatment right here. And when we deal with sludge, well, part of the process is that sludge from the primary sedimentation tanks, it's pumped to the sludge thickener. More settling occurs to concentrate the sludge prior to disposal. Now, what do your sedimentation tanks look like? These are your sedimentation tanks right here. And also the primary treatment, it reduces the suspended solids and the BOD of the wastewater. So basically from the primary treatment tanks, water is pumped to the trickling filter for secondary treatment. And then the secondary treatment will further reduce the suspended solids and BOD of the wastewater. Here's your secondary treatment. So you have your biological nutrient removal, which is known as your B&R secondary treatment. And the basis or purpose is to remove colloidal and dissolved organic material. So here's what happens. You have everything that's being removed. Here's your clarifier tank right here. Now, when it comes to your secondary treatment, everything is removed by forced air. Also, organisms feed on organic material in oxygen-rich environments. And again, this is your clarifier tank right here. This is where your sludge goes. It goes right in here. To your aeration tank, sits, and then it comes right up through the clarifier. These are your rotating plows. This is your weir. And once it settles here, then it's disinfected and released. Right here, you have your active sludge returning your aeration tank. And it's amazing how a wastewater treatment works, a wastewater treatment plant works. Now, I'm just giving you an overview. But a picture following the process is definitely something that works. So basically, this is sewer water. It's being treated. And you have primary and secondary. Secondary treatment is a biological process, utilizes bacteria and algae to metabolize organic matter in wastewater. So in Cape Girardeau, secondary treatment occurs on the trickling filter. The trickling filter does not filter the water. Water runs over a plastic media, and organisms clinging to the media remove the organic matter from the water. From secondary treatment on the trickling filter, water flows to the final clarifiers, further removal of sludge. The final clarifiers are another set of primary sedimentation tanks. From the final clarifiers, the water is discharged back into the Mississippi River, or it could be another body of water. Here, it would be the White River or the Wabash River. Now, the final clarifiers remove additional sludge and further reduce suspended solids and BOD. Now, so you'll know what a clarifier tank looks like. This is your clarifier tank right here. Now, you can actually walk across this catwalk, and here's your weir. Now, you can't see below this water, but that is where your rotating arms or your rotating plows are. And you can see this wastewater treatment plant has 2 clarifier tanks. And basically, if you're going to run a plant, you also have to be a certified technician, because sometimes, depending on how many tanks they are, these tanks have to be maintained. So they may shut one down and the other gets double work, and then vice versa. Also, when we deal with water treatment, we have the disposal of sludge and biosolids. So basically, the sludge undergoes lime stabilization. Why? Well, pH is raised by the addition of lime, and that's to kill potential pathogens. So basically, the stabilized sludge is land applied by injection into agricultural fields. Now, in the past, Cape Girardeau disposed of the sludge by landfill or incineration. Landfill disposal discontinued to the threat of the leachate. Now, incineration discontinued because of the ineffectiveness and cost. So, after all this, here in the wastewater treatment plant, the wastewater plant lab conducts a number of measurements and tests on water. So they're going to be testing the suspended solids, the pH, the BOD, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and of course, the temperature. In addition to the tests performed at the wastewater lab, an off-site contract lab performs additional tests. So on your heavy metals, your priority pollutants, your wet, which is your whole fluid toxicity, and they're all tests. And finally, when we deal with wastewater treatments, wastewater treatment plants, governmental agencies monitor wastewater treatment plants. Of course, this one is by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Here in Indiana, it would be the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, or IDEM, but the overall federal agency is the U.S. Protection Agency. And there you have it. What I've given you is how a wastewater treatment plant works. You have your grit chambers, you have your clarifier tanks, you have your disinfectants, you have your sludge removal, water is discharged back out as surface water from secondary, and it goes to landfill, the sludge from the primary. See, basically, the primary is to remove all the objects, while the secondary is basically it's biological. But overall, I've given you the process on how all of the water that would come from businesses, industries, and of course, residents is processed to give us clean water. And there are a lot of materials that you wouldn't even think of in clean water. And again, if you're going to be taking an FE exam, know the parts of a plant. How does it work? Well, basically, everything works through velocity, and you want to slow the velocity down. Now, of course, your primary clarifier tank, forced air is used for your secondary process. So again, going back, so I open it back up again, knowing where you are. Go back to some of these charts here. It's very important that you understand you have your primary treatment and your secondary treatment. And if you follow the flow, you understand. Now, let me take you back to, there's your bar screen. It catches all of your grit, your materials. This is the plant and what it looks like in full. Now, some plants have 2 clarifier tanks, some have 4. You have to remember, plants also operate on the population of people. So the larger your city is, you have to look at plants have capacity. But this is how a water treatment plant works. And it's part of keeping our water systems clean. Now, I'm going to do another video. This was wastewater. I'm going to do one on water treatment because there are differences. Now, can you take wastewater and make it clean water? You can. But I'm going to get into water treatment in the future. But until then, that concludes this topic on the wastewater treatment process. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some social and political content, check out the main channel, the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show channel. Now, here's where you can find me. For the 411 Talk Zone Radio Show channel, you can find me on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, Rumble, and Truth Social. For the QCIS channel, you can find me on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn. And once again, thank you for listening and viewing this content from about the wastewater treatment plants, how the wastewater treatment process works from the QCIS channel, formerly the Mind of STEM. But here on the QCIS channel, what I do is give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Until next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious evening.